It's time for the Bible. We don't really know for sure what is and what is not. Holy Ghost, God, agnostic, God, blasphemy, spot, Ghost, yes, friends, it's time for the Bible.
Yes, it's time for that darn Bible Geek again, and that's me, Robert M. Price. Got to admit it, as shameful as it may be. And I'd like to speak to those of you interested in argumentation and critical thinking, which, of course, is really what we're all about here. It's essential to biblical criticism as well as arguing for it, which many of us tend to have to do quite a bit. You might want to check out Bo Bennett's new online course on logical fallacies. In this course, he explains in detail dozens of the most common fallacies, how you can detect them, and how to avoid them. And he uses audio-visual content, something I never even tried to do in my logic courses from long ago. If you want to improve your critical thinking skills and help support the Bible Geek, because some of this indirectly comes back to me, visit Bo's URL at BibleGeek.masteringLogicalFallacies.com, and you can enroll even today. And again, that's Bible Geek, no space or anything, Bible Geek, that is, .masteringLogicalFallacies.com. Some of you have read his book on fallacies, which is really great and gives a lot of relevant examples. And in fact, when I taught logic years ago, most of the examples that came to mind of the various fallacies were familiar to me from religious polemics and apologetics. So check it out, BibleGeek.masteringLogicalFallacies.com. Okay, now on to some questions. Justin M. White in Tampa, Florida, says, just a quick question concerning Islam as, quote, the most successful of the Christian heresies, unquote. Is the source of this observation the 8th century writer John of Damascus, or are you thinking of someone more modern? I searched for this quote online and found this quote below from OxfordIslamicStudies.com. John of Damascus in the 8th century provided the first coherent treatment of Islam. His encounter with Muslims in the Umayyad administrative and military center of Damascus led him to regard Islam not as an alien tradition but as a Christian heresy. I'm almost surprised it goes back that far, actually. The statement, I think, is true, and though I realize there's a certain semantic question about what you consider a heresy and all that, but I think that's pretty fair. It does presuppose a kind of historical perspective I'm surprised was apparent at that point, but it's not impossible. I mean, he was certainly in the position to make such an evaluation. What does that mean? Well, of course, Christianity is in many ways an offshoot of Judaism. Islam is in many ways an offshoot of Judaism and Christianity and Zoroastrianism. The precise question is which one and when and in what order and so on. But the fact that Islam places itself in direct continuity with these religions and with their scriptures, that kind of makes it a Christian heresy. And you remember what a heresy was or is. It's based on the Greek word hieresis, choice. And it means that you're thinking for yourself on these matters and coming to your own conclusions rather than just swallowing what's spoon-fed by the church authorities. And this certainly has an awful lot of Jewish and Christian DNA, and the reason you'd consider it a heresy is, I suppose, because of Christology and Trinitarianism, which kind of get the bum's rush here. Islam returns to, I think, a kind of either Ebionite or Arian Christology, depending on where you're reading in the Quran, and it explicitly disavows the notion that Jesus is the Son of God, but on the other hand does consider him a prophet, sinless, virgin-born, the Messiah of Israel, and it says he will come again at the end of the age to establish a perfect theocracy, along with the Mahdi, the last of the imams and so on. And however, they say that Jesus was not crucified, he hadn't died, therefore he didn't rise. He was taken up to heaven just before he could be crucified. But he will die one day when he comes back, which is kind of the way the Messiah is depicted in 4th Ezra also. Muhammad is the fulfillment of the prophecy of the Paraclete, as were several other people like Mani and Montanus and so forth. They thought that, and so it is definitely a kind of reshuffling of Christian New Testament themes, and makes use of apocryphal gospels, and it's kind of evolved beyond Christianity, but yeah, it's kind of a form of Christianity that went so far in its own direction that it's repudiated as not being Christian, which is entirely reasonable. I mean, if you only start making accusations of bigotry or something if you're making a value judgment. Oh, when it developed from Christianity, it went off the track. If you say that, yeah, you're certainly being hostile toward it. And go ahead. I mean, I'm just saying that you could call it a heresy without any value judgment. So I don't think that's any kind of problematical pre-Enlightenment view of it. That's one of the many things I find so fascinating about Islam. You might have read my November Zarathustra Speaks column called I Slam Islam, and you might be saying, wait a minute, I thought you didn't like it. Well, in some ways I don't, but as I say there also, I've always found Islam very fascinating and still do. Okay, another question from Justin about that scary number 666. I've read in a few places that the original number actually was 616, and that using gematria, where letters each have a numeric value, and adding up the value makes it identify Nero. The book of Revelation was written many years after Nero and writes a hateful story where Michael, the angel, gets revenge and destroys him for all his evil. We all know that this prophecy of destruction and revenge never happened in the real world, so what's the point of it all? What message would the audience get from hearing the text except a story where their enemy has a bad end? It can't be prophecy because Nero is long gone, so what's the point? Oh, I'm sorry, this one I believe is from Miroslav Pokorny. And yeah, he's actually, there are some manuscripts, a minority of them, that have 616 rather than 666. And that was a big issue of debate in Irenaeus' day in the late 2nd century. And I forget which option he goes for. I think it's the 666. But that was, both versions existed in different copies of Revelation. And either way, it refers to Nero, because you could write it in Greek as Nero Caesar or Neron Caesar, like you could say Plato or Platon, either way. And so and that's the difference. It's just that somebody is converting Nero Caesar into numbers, and somebody else Neron Caesar. Just 1 second here. So the thing is with Nero, it all depends upon the I don't know what you want to call it, an urban legend or something, but a common belief toward the end of the 1st century that Irenaeus again tells us about, that the book was written in the time of Domitian, in the very late 1st century, and it presupposes that this legend, is that though Nero was killed, he would rise from the dead and return at the head of the Parthian army across the Euphrates and destroy Rome in revenge for having overthrown him. And that makes I don't believe it's attested anywhere outside of Irenaeus, but I think he seems to be referring to a common belief. I'm assuming that I'm giving him enough benefit of the doubt to assume that, yeah, that's right. That's what was going on, and that sure makes a lot of sense of some otherwise very weird stuff in Revelation. I mean, in the sense of being pointless otherwise. This stuff about the 10-headed beast, and how the 10th is one of the 7, and all this. And the beast had a mortal wound. One of the heads had a mortal wound, which, however, was healed. The Euphrates dries up, and this huge army crosses it and besieges Rome. Destroys the harlot sitting on the 7 hills, hint, hint, and these guys are described with very thinly veiled symbolism, implying that they're the Parthian cavalry and so forth. So it implies that the writer of Revelation believed that Domitian was the fulfillment of this prediction. He was Nero redivivus, as they say, whether literally or figuratively raised from the dead, just like the return of John the Baptist, right, one way or the other. And, of course, so it probably was genuinely intended as a prophecy, as Daniel was. Though in retrospect, of course, it failed. It didn't happen, and so that's the big problem that led to people like Hal Lindsey trying to readjust everything and saying that it's really talking about the Soviet Union. That's a big mistake, though I think it's quite reasonable to take Revelation in the way that Rabbi Neusner takes the whole Old Testament, as a kind of paradigmatic thing that shows you the kind of moment you occupy in history. You sort of recognize you read the signs of the times and say, this is just like in Revelation. It doesn't mean you think that a literal second coming of Christ is going to happen any minute. I know some people do, but it's like when people say, what are we going to have to do next with the NSA? Take the mark of the beast? That's an excellent way of looking at it. You're not saying like Dale Gribble that the government really is the beast. No, that's probably what they thought in the circles in which Revelation was written and read, but there's still a point when you say, this is nefarious. This is so similar to this mythic archetype in Revelation. I mean, when people thought that Hitler was the Antichrist, can you blame them? And of course, in terms of a literal prediction, they were wrong, but it kind of makes you think maybe that approach is off the track. Maybe, as 1 John says, there are many antichrists. It's sort of cyclical. And so I think the imagery is very powerful and apropos. It's good to keep in mind. I mean, if they actually one day said, okay, all citizens are going to have a trackable computer chip embedded, and it'll have all your credit history on it, your medical history, I think people would begin to say, wait a minute, this is too darn close to the mark of the beast thing, because not only physical similarity, the mark in the hand or the forehead, but the whole idea of this nosy, intrusive, implicitly tyrannical government that would require this. So I think it's very powerful and relevant, though in terms of a literal prophecy, it didn't work. It wasn't true. It was just like Harold Camping. Okay. This is from Pedar, or Peter, I guess, P-E-D-A-R. Sorry for my ignorance. He says, I thought I'd ask for your take on the definition of faith. I know that different versions of the Bible have varying degrees of vagueness on the matter, and that some folks consider the definition given in the King James Version, for example, to be essentially meaningless. It seems that there may be a shift occurring from believers formerly being comfortable with the idea that faith is belief without evidence, to faith being belief without adequate evidence, to what is being posited now, faith being belief with evidence, just not evidence that non-believers would accept, like the sensus divinitatis or some variety of self-evidence. On the other hand, you may be familiar with Peter Boghossian's definition of faith as pretending to know things you don't know. That's not unfair. I had initially recoiled a little at this interpretation, as it seemed excessively confrontational, but I've gotten more comfortable with it over time. It seems to me that this issue is important, as it presents a crucial position in the justification and challenging of belief. Yeah, that's true. They're really... I'm sorry, let me just finish it on the next page here. I can see this question leading down a rabbit hole of definitions, like what it means to believe and to know, what's factual and what's true, but it seems like a worthy effort. Yeah, this is a huge issue, both in exegesis and theology. In my pre-Nicene New Testament and Human Bible New Testament, I tend to translate this as belief in or holding, well, not these exact words, but holding to the Christian faith in the sense of the Christian religion. I don't see the justification for rendering it as a marker of the sticky pietism of evangelicalism and fundamentalism, that your faith in Christ is a personal relationship, as in some sort of channeling way, that you're listening for the voice of Christ in your head and all that. I just don't see that in the text. I think they're smuggling born-again devotionalism into it, because it's pretty clear that the whole personal Savior thing, the central plank of fundamentalism, is just not in the Bible. I think it is more of a old-style Catholic thing, that this is what you believe to be true. Then there's the issue of some Life of Jesus apologists like to say that, well, it's not so, that in the Pauline epistles there's nothing about Jesus and his character and his personal history, because when it speaks of the faith of Jesus, the faith in Jesus Christ, it could just as easily be translated the faith of Jesus Christ, or they even prefer the faithfulness of Jesus Christ, so that it's not saying to us that faith in Christ is what saves, but we're saved by emulating the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. That strikes me as outrageous text twisting, personally, but that is a position in the debate. Then there is the question of, is it a matter of belief that something is true, or is it more of an existential commitment? Bultmann says there's a big difference between the other Pauline epistles and the so-called Pauline pastoral epistles, that in the latter we start hearing about the faith, a set of tenets, whereas in the genuine Pauline epistles, assuming there are any, you're talking more about an existential encounter with God or with Christ, and this one can suspect is influenced by Heideggerian existentialism, which was much on Bultmann's mind. I'm not sure if the text really suggests that. It's not incompatible with it, but I'm not sure that's the clear implication. Paul Tillich, really going into theology more than exegesis. By that I mean, of course, what the writers seem to have thought, the scriptural writers. Tillich says that just look at the use of the term throughout Christian history. Nobody has ever thought mere assent to a set of tenets in a creed is saving faith. I mean, why do we even have a different word for that, namely faith, that is different on the one hand from knowledge and on the other from belief? He says faith surely implies this existential ultimate concern. I mean, who denies that, right? The revival preachers say stuff like, you may know about Christ, but do you know him? Well, yeah, that's a legitimate question in terms of faith. Isn't it concern? Otherwise, oh yeah, sure, I believe it. What's on TV? It could be pat faith. I mean, that's what all revivalists are trying to tell you about. Yeah, you may indeed have these beliefs, but does it mean anything to you? That makes plenty of sense. Of course, Tillich brilliantly took it further and said, you know, if faith isn't exactly the same thing as belief, which is to say that belief is not a sufficient condition for salvation, maybe you could say that neither is belief a necessary condition. Is it possible to have faith in the sense of ultimate concern when you're overwhelmed by doubt? He says, sure it is. The dark night of the soul, etc., etc. I think Tillich could even have pushed it as far as to say even somebody like Madeleine Murray O'Hair, a crusading atheist, had faith. Because to her, obviously, the existence of God was her ultimate concern. She didn't believe that there was a God, but she thought this was the most important question, and certainly lived her life about it. So there's a lot of interesting wiggle room, or should I better say a range of understandable opinions about this. It is quite interesting. People are sometimes impatient with it because they are believing these passages that you're saved by faith. Well, they want to make pretty darn sure they know what faith is. This thing about faith with no evidence, I think Kierkegaard would have gone along with that, the great leap. And then the apologist view that it's a step of faith, not a leap of faith. Your second option there, that no, that's your third one, right? That there is evidence. It's not absolutely convincing, but what evidence there is seems to them to point in the direction of the truth of Christianity. So they say, why not take the next step? I mean, it's you can't, like a couple of street lights ahead are out, but you know well enough from the trajectory and the lights you've just seen back there where to drive next. I mean, it could veer off at some angle and go over the cliff, but what are the chances of that? You're not just flying blind. And there is the notion that there's inadequate evidence. That's what apologists don't want you to believe. They try to shave some difference between this and the step of faith. They want to say that well, wait a minute. No, I guess really what I want to say is that they would like you to think it's only a step of faith and not to realize that that kind of means there is not sufficient evidence, right? Why would you even be talking about it if it were simply an inevitable conclusion, as Josh McDowell said, evidence that demands a particular verdict? So I think they kind of waffle on that. because you don't want to just say it's knowledge, like it's just information, don't you see it? But some do, and there's a lot of discussion that I think is controlled by people's theological needs, but none of these views are absurd. None of them seem particularly contrived. I think the faithfulness of Jesus Christ is a bit contrived, but the other ones are coherent notions. Let's see. Matthew from Pittsburgh says, I'm wondering what you make of the Sibylline Oracles. When I was in high school in the late 90s, I received a copy of the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, edited by James H. Charlesworth. I was mesmerized by all of those strange texts, but the oracles always struck me as the strangest of the bunch. The juxtaposition of pagan and Christian imagery in the oracles, the odd, disjointed nature of the oracles themselves, and the unlikely claim that they may include remnants from the Roman Sibylline books, among other things, made the text captivating to me. I know that the oracles are quoted by the Church Fathers more than any biblical text, and that Celsus commented that the Christian over-reliance on the oracles in his critique of Christianity. I'm wondering, what was the value of the oracles to the early Christians? Do they tell us anything unexpected about the early church? Do they shed any light on the Christ myth theory or on the relationship between Christianity and the pagan religions? Are there any interesting facts or theories relating to the oracles you can tell us about? Any information you have on the subject would be greatly appreciated. Well, Matthew, Margaret Morris has proposed a really interesting theory that I'm sorry, I should back up here. The way the way scholars generally tend to understand this is there are several passages where it seems to be predicting that this great Savior will come and he'll walk on water and do these various Jesus-like, gospel-like miracles. And so they figure, well, these are Christian interpolations, and what they're trying to do is to do the same trick you find in, Titus, or one of the pastorals, as even one of their own poets has said. For the same reason people used to love to quote Virgil on the child leading them and all that. They figure, hey, this isn't just us. Other people knew this was coming. So Jesus is fulfilling your prophecies as well as ours, so you ought to take this seriously. And I think that's the point also of the Pythoness, the oracle in Philippians 16. She's demon-possessed, for Pete's sake. She's not a Christian, and yet she's going around dogging the footsteps of Paul and Silas, saying, hey, everybody, listen to these guys. They're telling you the way of salvation. And then Paul gets sick of this. I'm not quite sure why, and tells her to shut up and sends the demon backing. The idea is, you see, even the demons know this. So, of course, you can think back to the Gospels, where the demons are yelling out, hey, this guy is Jesus, Son of the Most High God. And will you shut up? Jesus says. It's like, you see, even they know. And James, it says, even the devils believe and tremble. And so it's not just us. You ask the pagans, ask the demons, and so on. I think that was probably why. Cheap stunt with Christian apologetics. That's why Pliny's letter to Trajan is probably a fake. It says, boy, these Christians, I don't know why we persecute them, though I'm willing to do it. They don't do anything wrong, and so forth. That's Christian propaganda. Okay, Morris's theory, however, is no, these are not Christian interpolations. These are oracles reflecting the belief in the Roman emperors. I mean, Augustus, and particularly Augustus, who was called the Savior, who brought world peace and all that. His birth and monument says the beginning of the gospel of Caesar Augustus, and she says, no, this was pagan Roman stuff. And what's the relation to Jesus? Well, Jesus is at least in part based on these passages, because Jesus as a whole is a kind of a propaganda version of Caesar Augustus. The people that circulated this are trying to put the Roman Caesar in terms more readily acceptable by Jews. This preceded the Joe Atwill thing, Caesar's Messiah. In fact, there are about 4 or 5 different theories that Jesus is a sort of Judaization of one of the Caesars. And of course, there's a lot more arguments in this. Her book has not come out yet. I'm lucky enough to have read it in manuscript. But the idea is, again, there was no historical Jesus unless you want to consider Caesar Augustus that. And the Sibylline Oracles were originally predictions, probably after the fact, about how great Augustus was, and when the Jesus character was created as a propaganda version of Augustus, the stories followed the so-called predictions, and so they really were pagan predictions that led to Jesus, but not in the way the early Christians thought. It is quite fascinating, and there was some kind of, I guess a lot of Jews like the Sibylline Oracles too, and made their own interpretation, so it was certainly around in that milieu. And there must have been a lot of converts from Roman paganism who just brought the oracles with them and just updated them to their new faith by putting interpolations in, if that's what you think the gospel-like passages are. The Shepherd of Hermas certainly seems to be, though it's unquestionably a Christian work, the whole notion of it seems to be to provide a kind of half Sibylline, half Hermetic version of Christianity, or should I say adapting those genres to the Christian message. So yeah, I think it's something that wouldn't have been completely alien by any means to Christians, and they would have borrowed it and adapted it for their own purposes. That doesn't necessarily mean it was some sort of fraud. It just means people are trying to make sense of 2 different things they'd like to believe. They don't want to make a complete divorce from what they had believed. Another one from Justin White in Tampa. He says, I've heard you say that the Bible does not address abortion, but isn't that what Numbers 5:21 is all about? The potion causes the woman's, quote, thigh to rot, unquote, and belly to swell. Second, speaking of thighs, being as it is a figure of speech for the sex organs, what is with all the figures of speech in the Bible? These people who purportedly rip out babies from wombs have no words for uterus? It seems simply a method to obscure meanings so that much remains ambiguous, like Gehenna for the lake of fire. You mean Jesus had no word for hell? Absurd. Well, of course, that was the word for hell, right? That and Hades, and later, in 1 Peter, Tartaros. Those had become technical terms for hell. As I remember, I looked this up once. I can't remember all the details. The Numbers 5:21 thing is a bit ambiguous and does not necessarily refer to a forced miscarriage. I'll have to look that up again, but that would be pretty close to a reference to abortion, but I don't think it is. Is there any religion other than Christianity that relies so heavily on emotional music? I think modern Christian theology is based primarily on medieval paintings, music, and sanitized translations that hide the polytheistic origins of Christianity. Yeah, I think that is correct. You do have to wonder about a link between the mystery religions and hymns like "There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins," Jesus' veins, and sinners plunged beneath that flood lose all their guilty stains. Boy, does that sound like the Mithraic Tarabolium, where you took a shower in the blood of a bull standing on a grate above you. Though I can't believe the writer of that hymn even had ever heard of that, but still the washed in the blood thing, you do find that in the New Testament, I think once in Revelation, and you have to wonder if that did come from mystery religions. But I don't know enough about the other ones. I'm sure Jewish hymns are pretty emotionally stirring. But I have to admit, I've never looked into that aspect of the various world religions. I know there's chanting in Hinduism quite a bit, but I don't know what the musical deal is there. I wish I did know. But yeah, this is just what you'd expect from the kind of gushy, sticky emotionalism of revivalistic fundamentalism. One of the things I find really personally kind of revolting about it. Another one from Justin. I remember an older episode a couple of years ago where you discussed early depictions of Jesus as a young man or youth, and this had something to do with him being associated with sun gods. Yeah, the earliest, I think, mosaic tile portraits of Jesus show him in looking pretty much just like Apollo in contemporary art. Okay, this had something to do, yeah, sun gods. I'm afraid I've gotten the details mixed up in my head, and the sort of association is hard to look up without knowing the specifics. Can you clarify this relationship? Also, since there's so much bad literature concerning pagan parallels to Christ, are there any resources that comprehensively cover these connections? And which of these associations strongest? Well, there are a bunch of strong ones between Jesus and Dionysus. I'm the true vine. His winnowing fan is in his hand. He changes water into wine. He's the Son of God, etc. But of course, the death and resurrection associated with nature, that is a hugely strong one. Miraculous birth stories are big also. Those would, I guess, be the main ones, but there are many others, minor details here and there, which do count. I deal with some of these in my books, Deconstructing Jesus and The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man, but I would also recommend Richard Carrier's latest book, the title of which I am completely blanking out on. It's, I'm sure you can find it on Amazon. It came out from University of Sheffield Press, Sheffield Academic Press. That's probably the most comprehensive list of these things. And I will see if next time I can look, if I can remember to do it, I'll try to find where I first saw this. But I would Google Jesus as Apollo and see what you come up with. Also, Sons, S-U-N-S, of God, by Acharya S. goes into all this. I'm sure she must talk about that. That woman is incredibly comprehensive on her research. So I'd also recommend that. I'm sure that would be a good resource. Well, the pizza will be here in a minute, so I better get off. It's great being with you on the Bible Geek, and I'll try to get back again soon to talk with you again. Thanks for sticking it out with the old geek, and I'll see you before long.
The Bible Geek was recorded by Robert M. Price and produced by John Felix and Sergeant Jovanovich. Theme song by John Morris. Visit us at robertmprice.mindvendor.com for more info on Robert's projects, purchase Bible Geek merchandise, and click the ever-important Donate button. Send your questions to criticus@aol.com, and be sure to rate and review The Bible Geek on iTunes. Thanks for listening to The Bible Geek. I'm Torrin Atkinson.